Well, hi, everybody at St. Paul's. You can see that we are joined today with Bishop Doug. So this is a treat. Normally this upcoming Sunday, we would be having our visitation. And along with that, those of you who are excited to be confirmed, to be received, all of that was going to happen. So it's a bittersweet thing this Sunday. But we are still the Church in the Wild. We're here, and we are going to do our usual gospel and reflection. I'll be reading the gospel today. Bishop Doug is going to give us a reflection on that, and then we're going to have a conversation and talk about some of the things that I know many of you are thinking about. So with that, let's open with a prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Man, that is so much fun to have somebody else to say that back to me. Okay. Already, this is exciting. Loving God, we thank you for your presence. We thank you for the signs of your presence in your church, wherever we are and wherever we may be found. Be with us now as we hear your word. Open ourselves to your spirit. Guide us as we follow your lead. And all this we pray in the merciful name of Jesus, our Savior. Amen.
Amen.
Well, this morning, or whenever it is that folks are watching this, we have the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Matthew. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to cure every disease and every sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First Simon, also known as Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Cananean, and Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions: "Go nowhere among the Gentiles, and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. As you go, proclaim the good news. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received without payment, give without payment." The gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Well, again, St. Paul's, I love St. Paul's. I wish I was there doing confirmations and receiving folks and all the usual things that happen at a visitation, but we have a pandemic. And so we figured it out. And I just want to thank St. Paul's for figuring it out. I want to thank your leadership, especially want to thank Marisa, who during this time of trying to lead during an extraordinary time is a great challenge, and she's got a great gift to do that. So thank you, Marisa. Thank you, Vestry. And thank you for St. Paul's. Thanks for staying faithful through this. So I'll give a short reflection on today's gospel. So in today's gospel, Jesus tells the disciples to go out, cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. So I've often wondered if at the end of the year for our parochial report, besides putting down how many people were baptized, how many funerals happened, what the average Sunday attendance was, what would happen if we put down how many sick that we cured, how many dead we raised, how many lepers we cleansed, and how many we cast out? Be quite a report. Well, that's a challenge for sure. So I think we look to the early church to see how they met that challenge. That was their marching orders from Jesus, both in the physical ministry of Jesus and then the resurrected Lord told them to do the same thing. So how did they go about addressing that challenge? Well, for one thing, I think they did it as a learning community. They were figuring it out, just like you and Marisa are trying to figure out what it means to be church during a pandemic. They were trying to figure out what it meant to be church in the earliest days after the death and the resurrection of Jesus. So things they learned. One thing they learned was when we hear in the Acts of the Apostles that St. Paul was preaching one day, and he was preaching in the upper room of a big house. And there was a little boy who was sitting on the windowsill of that house on the second floor as St. Paul preached. And Paul preached on, and the boy fell asleep and fell out the window. And then there's this big scene where Paul runs out there and heals his wounds and lifts them up. So what did the church learn? The church learned no long sermons. Don't do long sermons very early on. Another thing they learned, we hear in Acts 12 that Peter was arrested by Herod, and he was put in jail, and there were guards watching over him. But in the middle of the night, an angel came and set Peter free, got him out. And then when Herod heard the next day that Peter had escaped, he flew into a rage and he executed the guards because they didn't do their job. That's chapter 12 of Acts. Chapter 16, we hear about another arrest. This time it wasn't Peter, it was Paul and Silas. And they want to make sure they're not going to get away, and they put them in the innermost cell. That's what Acts of the Apostles says. Puts them in the innermost cell and shackles them hand and feet. Well, this time there's no angel, but there's an earthquake. And because of the earthquake, they get free of their shackles and the doors fly open. But they didn't leave. And the next day, when the guard came and saw that the doors had flown open, he takes out his sword to kill himself because he knows that he's going to be executed for having failed to do his job. And it's just as he does that, Paul shouts out, "Don't do that. We're still here. We're still here." Because they realized that if they had escaped, the guard would have been executed. So they saved his life. So one of the learnings of the early church was they grew in compassion. They grew in compassion. They figured it out. And can that be part of our life together? That we grow in compassion. We learn things. We don't have it all together. We don't know it all, but we grow in compassion. There's another story with that. There's a story where Peter is called by the centurion, a soldier, Cornelius. I think this is a great story for St. Paul's because you've got that great veterans ministry. And so Cornelius calls him, and remember, Jesus had said to the disciples in that reading that we just said from Matthew, don't go to the Gentiles. First, go to the Jewish people. Go to the lost tribes of Israel. Well, now he goes to Cornelius, and Cornelius wants to be baptized. And he's figuring, well, I can't baptize him because he's not Jewish. But then he does. He baptizes Cornelius. He opens out his heart. He learns something. One of my bishop classmates is Rob Wright. He's the bishop in Atlanta. And he commented on Peter baptizing the centurion, the Gentile Cornelius. And he says this, he says, let our actions flow from there. There's this great German theologian, Karl Rahner. And Karl Rahner talks about the supernatural existential. The supernatural existential. And what he means by that is that every human being, in our very existence, is created for a capacity for God. We're created to hear from God. We're created to hear from the supernatural. And isn't that St. Paul's? Community immersed in prayer, community that's learning, community that's growing in compassion, figuring out how to follow
Oops, there we are. Okay,
Okay.
we're back.
You were frozen there for a minute, Marisa.
I know. I got kicked off once, so I'm not sure. I think we lost some choice quotes, unfortunately. But yeah, I think we left off at immersed in prayer and learning, a learning community.
Okay. Always challenges. I've been doing these Zooms either like we're doing it beforehand or sometimes on Sunday morning itself with folks. And one Sunday morning, Zoom went down throughout the whole country.
Yeah.
So morning prayer at atonement became evening prayer at atonement.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
It's good to be with you. So what do you think the good people of St. Paul's want to know from their
So
bishop?
great question. I know the question on the forefront of everybody's mind is, are we reopening? What's that going to look like? When is that going to happen? What can we expect? Those sorts of things. And we've got a subgroup of the vestry that's just begun meeting, just to begin to parse through all of the regulations that we have from both you and the state, and they've done just an incredible job of digesting that. I sent all of those links to folks, so anybody who's interested in going through page after page of sanitary requirements and all of that. But I guess it's also a lot of information to take in, and it's really hard to distill any kind of clarity out of just sort of so much of the noise. And I feel like anytime we're click on to or tune into any kind of media, it just becomes such a circus of anxiety provocation that it just becomes that much harder to figure out what any of this reopening stuff means. So I think now that you've undoubtedly explained it dozens and dozens of times, if you might give us kind of from your view, what are we looking at? What's the trajectory?
Sure, happy to do that. And we don't talk about it so much as reopening. We use the phrase moving forward, how we move forward. So, and the great part about this work is I've been doing it in conjunction with Alan Gates, the Bishop of Massachusetts, because we wanted to have one common Episcopal policy for the whole Commonwealth. And so we've had a team of people both on our side and his side working together, conferred with scientists and doctors, and obeying Michael Curry, who says, whatever you do, err on the side of love. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to err on the side of love. So we might be more cautious than some of our other ecumenical brothers and sisters, and we respect what they're doing, but we're really trying to err on the side of caution. So what we said was that churches would, the church building would continue to be closed until July 1st at least. The church is not closed. The church continues to do its mission. We thank you, Marisa, for your mission and for all the things that people at St. Paul's are doing, checking up on one another and caring for their neighborhood. But the church building stays closed until July 1st. And then we move forward in phases. So right now we're in phase 1. Phase 2 would be to have in-person worship with a number of different conditions on it. And again, people can read about those conditions. But there wouldn't be communion because we don't feel that's safe to do communion at that time. It would be limited numbers. Something that you've got an advantage of at St. Paul's Holyoke is how big your building is. So people can spread out, and that's an advantage. The disadvantage is that means you got to clean a lot of places. So we've put out guidelines, and now actually a few hours, we'll be putting out more details about those guidelines, because
Oh.
since then people have asked all kinds of good questions, and we want to do this working with others. I mean, this isn't just our deans and Rich Simpson, Vicky Hicks on their own making these decisions, or me, but it's getting input from you, getting input from people from throughout our diocese. And so phase 2 would be services with a limited number of people, a morning prayer type of service that we hope people will continue to use video for. What we've discovered during this time is there's a lot more people who have tuned into video than who actually used to go to church. So if churches that had 60, 70 people on church on a Sunday morning are getting 100, 150 people going to Facebook Live or Zoom or whatever platform is being used. So we're hoping that people continue to do that, so that continues to be an outreach. And then there's a phase 3 where more things are possible, and phase 4, which is full celebrations. But we're doing that in stages, listening to our people, listening to the scientists, listening to doctors. We've got people who look at all the numbers, which, as you mentioned before, can be confusing. You know, what does a drop in cases mean? What does an increase in testing mean? What does all that mean? But we'll also say to churches that they don't have to move forward to the next phase, even when that next phase is open to them. So July 1st or around then, we hope to move to phase 2. But if your people feel more comfortable worshiping online and don't feel safe going back into the church at this point, you don't have to go into phase 2. You can stay in phase 1. And the same thing after that. If you're in phase 2 and all of us are in phase 2, and we say, you know, our reading of things is that you can go into phase 3, you can say, well, but at St. Paul's, we're not ready to go into phase 3, and you can stay in phase 2. The only thing that we're not allowing is for churches to jump ahead of where the rest of the diocese is. So if we're all in phase 2, and St. Paul's is doing that and things are good, you've got to wait for us to say phase 3. You can't say, well, St. Paul's going to go into phase 3 now. You can stay where you are, but you can't jump ahead. And again, this is being done with an abundance of caution, knowing again how many of our parishioners are over 65. I just joined that group last December, and so we want to make sure that people really feel safe coming back to in-person, in-church worship.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I know part of the struggle that the committee that's working on this for St. Paul's is facing is, yeah, we have this huge space, but we also have such tiny, tiny windows. And as we get into the warmer season, we're so acutely aware of how little airflow there actually is. And so trying to come up with some way to sort of get a gauge of what the risk is when it seems so much is airborne. I know one of the things that was particularly painful for the vestry to read was that there's no singing in phase 2.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. That's a big part of what we do in terms of worship. But again, the science says that singing propels droplets that go a lot further than 6 feet. So we've got to listen to that. Yeah. And another real difficulty through this is that there's been, something that's been heartbreaking to me, but is our reality, is not having funerals in church. We can do graveside services for a maximum of 10 people. I've done a couple of those, and one of the great things about the Episcopal Church, there's things that we're still growing and learning, but something we're really great at is helping people to grieve, and doing pastoral care. And our funeral services are beautiful. Show us that life has changed, not ended. And we've had to postpone those and continue to postpone them for a while longer. That's happened to a lot of our churches. I'm sure it's happened at St. Paul's. In terms of our church, nationally and internationally, Bishop Barbara Harris, the first ever female bishop in the Episcopal Church, died just before the pandemic happened. And so,
right.
And there was going to be a huge celebration at the National Cathedral. big celebration at St. Paul's in Boston, and all that's on hold.
Right. Well, yeah, I was wondering about that. I figured that would be huge, and such classic Bishop Barber style to just be like, nope, I'm not messing with this. She really, wow. Yeah. I know there's concern. So, we're a church like many churches, as we are turning outward and embracing our surrounding community and really asking deep questions. We've had this mission commission for the last year or so, really inquiring through just deep discernment work, what our relationship is to our wider community, where the needs of our neighbors are intersecting our gifts and resources. And I've just been so impressed with everybody who's been involved in that, from a little bit to a lot. But part of that's recognizing that we have this wealth in the form of our buildings, and our sort of financial picture reflects that. So, St. Paul's folks have been amazing at keeping up with their pledging and giving, and at the same time, sizable portion of our operating budget comes from building usage. And of course, all that is off. There's no birthday parties, there's no quinceañeras, there's no weddings, So, I think there's some considerable financial concern as well. And I think, what can you tell us in terms of reassuring words, or quick, make a totally different way of doing everything? Where are we at in that? Like, how serious is it? Are we waiting and seeing, like, what's the process in terms of the diocesan view?
Yeah, and each church has its own challenges. The challenge of your church is you have, thank God, you use the building so well for so many people. And now that an income stream is not there. So what we've done so far is just to give some relief to all of our parishes, is that there was no mission assessment for the 2 months. So the money that goes into the diocesan work has been forgiven. And then we were able to get the payroll protection plan, which we were able to get for the whole diocese, which is really unusual. In most places, you have to apply church by church, but because all of the payroll comes from our office, a centralized payroll plan, we could just apply as one entity. And so because of that, all of our clergy, all of our employees, I think we have like 295 employees.
Wow.
They were all covered for 2 months. So we hope that helps people in terms of churches with their income flow. That plan is over now, and we don't have unlimited resources in our diocese, but we'll certainly try and be helpful as we can and where we can. And we continue to pray and take things like the early church. We go and we learn, and we don't know, is there going to be a second wave of this in the fall or not?
Right.
But we pay attention to what's going on around us, and reach out to community needs, and to do that as we can safely. There's a lot of different churches that have food pantries, and some of those have had to shut down. Others have continued to do it, but in a safe manner, where people come up and all kinds of precautions are taken, and they hand out bags of food. So yeah, it's all that.
Yeah, well, and one of the really encouraging things for me is seeing how we're trying to pivot. I mean, we just haven't had enough people who aren't in, super high risk groups, or nothing has come clear in terms of, like, how do we continue the vets lunch in some form at this point? Now that we may figure out some way to do bag lunches, but what's happened in the meantime is, again, largely thanks to Gina and her work, trying to answer those questions. It looks like we're going to start having the food bank they've been doing these drops, right? Because they don't have as many sort of kitchens and places to give out this food. So they're doing just direct drops. And they've got it all sort of prepackaged and plasticed up to make it really safe. So we've been working with some other, sort of local leadership in town to, like, round up some volunteers, do a distribution in the parking lot, And now I'm hearing that Girls Inc. wants to sort of join in that in some way so that they can hand out menstrual supplies, particularly for families of girls that are having a hard time getting that, because those things are expensive. So that's, starting to happen. And so we're beginning to, interface with a different set of people. Our garden is still attracting attention, and there's been, it's been something that's outdoors so people can sort of filter through. Of course, Jimmy, our intern, has been doing a great job of, helping to create partnerships. And so with so much anxiety in the city about food scarcity and just, poverty that much worse because of the economic effects of all of this, and people caring for each other, we're starting to see directions to move in where we can still sort of be the church and do that. And, the rest is logistics, which is, as you know, not a small thing. But I know that's been such a Book of Acts kind of encouragement to me. So I wanted you to know that that's sort of what's happening. I wanted everybody to sort of get updated on some of those things, because some of that has just come together in the last few days.
Yeah, that's great. And St. Andrew's Longmeadow does something similar to that. And then your garden is just a great gift. It really is. And it's, regularly in contact with Jimmy, who's a seminarian now, and that's great work. And it's both addressing real needs, and at the same time, it's a great symbol. Here in the midst of Holyoke, in the midst of a pandemic, St. Paul's plants a garden. It's a great story.
Right? Life, life in the midst of all of that. And like, it's a food garden. So it's producing, life that will sustain life. So yeah, it feels very much the abundant life that we were promised and that we are called to serve and support. So
yeah, and I know that Jimmy's planted different foods that Latino folks use for their recipes, and so that's great too. It's great to have that kind of cultural awareness.
Right. Also totally delicious. So basically, if you're a fan of that good rice, like, this is the stuff you need to make that good rice.
Yeah.
So, and then of course, everybody who walks by, I was down there the other day and this family came up because they were trying to hand off a, form for summer program, our homework house partners that, have been meeting, and we're still trying to figure out what's even possible for fall or what summer programming. They're trying to figure all that out. So everybody's kind of in the same boat. But in the midst of this family walks up and they're like, oh, hey, do you know where to put this form and all this? And I pointed them in the right direction. And then they said, this garden is cool. And I was like, yeah, you know what we're growing? And they're like, no. And I said, it's the stuff for sofrito. And they were like, what? No way. And so just, like, the recognition is it means a lot. So I'm always struck by the warmth and emphaticness of the response when we tell people what's going in the garden, and they're like, you would do that? It's really, it says a lot. It says a lot. So
yes, it's a great story. Own that story.
Yeah, it's good. The last thing I wanted to ask you about, obviously it's just been such turmoil in our country, in very obvious and on fire kinds of ways in the last week, but also it's a 400-year-old fire that's been burning. And I know many of us at St. Paul's are struggling with what our response as a church should be, what our response as the people of God really is for those of us who are white. How do we support our fellow parishioners who are Black, who are brown? And it's really complicated. And as I said in my message last week, like, I am so impressed and just so in awe of the love and the care and the depth of concern and the willingness to be uncomfortable, the willingness to try new things and to change that I'm seeing from so many of our folks. And I think part of what helped was that incredibly powerful message from all the Province 1 bishops, which was just so beautiful. And I guess I'm sort of curious if you might share some of what your process, along with the other bishops, was in coming to those powerful words and powerful message.
Sure. Well, what happened on that Monday night was just so outlandish. Seeing people rubber bullets in a tear gas and a peaceful demonstration just so that the president could go to a church. But most particularly, it was one of our churches. It's St. John's Episcopal Church. And so we really felt used and abused as a church. And Mary Ann Buddy, the Bishop of Washington, D.C., was absolutely incredible. And she has spoken so many times since, but she was doing this on the fly and just really calling this out for what it was. And so we felt we needed to stand with her. And so literally that night, we wrote that, and we felt it would be more powerful coming from all of us as opposed to just one bishop at a time. And so we did that. But then to follow Mary Ann Buddy's path again, is she keeps saying, this happened, we opposed what happened, we're calling it out. But the deeper reality is the 400 years of racism and the need for racial reconciliation. So let's keep going on that direction. And so we attempted to do that in that statement as well, just to make our statement, to be clear where we stood, but then to point us in the direction of racial reconciliation, which is so needed. I think part of that too, to make a parallel with that, with what happened at the Veterans Home, not far from you, and all those veterans who died. And, you might have seen Chris Carlisle and I put out an op-ed that was covered in several papers to say, this is horrible that this happened, but instead of just all the finger pointing about who did what when and who's to blame, is to say that this was part of a much bigger problem having to do with lack of care for our veterans in so many different ways. And that's what we should be looking at. We should be looking at the larger systematic things that keep our veterans from having the life that they really deserve. And so the same is true with this. There's the protests, there's all kinds of things that are important, the peaceful protests, but also to look at the larger systematic picture and say, we got to deal with that gave rise to what's happening now. Not just this moment, but all the things that have given rise to that. And so that's long, hard work.
Yeah.
So thank you for embracing that work.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. It's amazing to see this community of people who love God and have loved each other and are facing how hard it is to do that loving work sometimes, but that the love is keeping us, connected in relationship. It's profound. It's amazing. So yeah, I have been so just in awe and moved by it's so obviously the power of the Holy Spirit working in us, because where else does this happen? Where else do we have the opportunity to come together with people who see things differently, who haven't had the experiences that we've had, or however that plays out, and yet we're bonded in this way that makes us not just dismiss one another, which is what it seems like happens everywhere else in our society. So we have a real opportunity here.
Okay. That's a great word to use. We have a real opportunity. We shouldn't let this pass by.
Yeah.
Even the pandemic, it's.
Yeah.
I think we learned from the pandemic how much we love each other. We realized that there's again disparity in the fact that the disease impacts people of color more than it does others.
Right. Also
impacts people who are elderly, and so to respect and care for all of us. And the other thing too is a real invitation to, as Jesus says, to pray always. Thank God for our church buildings. We need them, but prayer isn't restricted to those buildings. And so I've found people come up with a whole new appreciation for morning prayer, noontime prayer, and evening prayer, and Compline. They were called to pray always. We can take that from the pandemic.
Yeah. Wow. Amen to all of that. Any other words for us at St. Paul's?
To keep that phrase going that we've said, that the church buildings are closed, but the mission of the church goes on and on. The mission of the church is more important than ever. So to, just like you're doing, in creative, imaginative ways, keeping that mission going. And move slowly and cautiously and safely back into in-church worship, with a whole new appreciation for how we're called to reach out beyond the church building. So thank you for doing that, and again to take these things as learning opportunities, just as the early church did.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll so look forward to a full round of confirmations and receptions and all of that good stuff when we are able to do it in person. So
I'm really looking forward to that day.
yeah, me too. All right, so here's our video for Sunday.
God bless St. Paul's.
Thank you so much.